the show. And it's just theadamdunnshow.com, and there's all the former links there. And you can go to YouTube, they're on YouTube. It's like a live, you actually have to look at it sometimes.
Yeah, like a podcast.
Yeah, it's a podcast,
Yep.
yeah. So, okay, we're ready?
Yeah.
All right. Well, welcome everybody to this 101 Growing. This is really 101 because, again, like I was saying, there's each subject matter has many side subjects and many things that go kind of deeper that you could look into. But the basics of growing is getting comfortable with your techniques, and also, having it so that your plants kind of showing you the way, because it's a lot of times people think it's like cut and dry, cookie cutter, you put the thing in, on this day you do this. Well, that you can do that, and you can follow somebody's protocol, which there's a lot of people online doing week by week, and what you find is it's literally species by species, and it's also crop by crop. It's a different. Like if you live in Oklahoma, you're gonna have different conditions than here in Colorado. And in Colorado, you have many different kind of. You have so many microclimates. I was living up in Golden, so I was kind of like above where you guys were at, and I was at 6,400, I think, 6,500 feet, and I mean that's a pretty comfortable place. But then if you drive 9 miles up the hill, up on Cold Creek, it becomes quite noticeably different, and so you have to adjust for those things. And that's what I think in the beginning is all of these things that I'll talk about are all relative, but they have a lot of variables, and that's the key. And I think that's why some people respond better to growing anyway in general, because they see the key signs and they respond to them, and then they have the patience to wait, because these things are not, also plants take like an average of about 2 to 3 days to respond to whatever treatment you've done to them, So people tend to overshoot it. They'll see some little tiny speck on the plant and go into full on mode and not realize that, it's actually not a big deal. It might have been, it could be light damage sometimes, wind damage from the fan being too close to it. The edges of your leaves get a little burned up or something. So in general, it's like the subtleties are the things that we need to pick up on. I gotta go through my slide. I didn't look through the slides since last time, so I'm gonna see what you want to. Okay. Cool. All right. So basics, I guess, is why everybody's here for. Now I'm saying here, grow your own. Some people obviously are going to think commercially and they want to grow for commercial reasons. To me, that's like the bottom of the reason list that you want to do. If that's your only focus, then you want to stick with, hydro, simple, add A plus B, get that. If that's your main goal, because then you're not spending as much time in the room and you're not giving yourself that one-on-one time with the plants. And that's one of the things at the beginning part with connecting with nature and the planet. I think that, especially in the city situation, like living in the city, a grow room is like your little solitude. You go from the end of the day, you spend an hour minimum. I always, even if it's a 2-light room, I think you should spend about an hour, just because there's 24 hours in a day, and that 1 hour that you're in there, you might think you know what's going on in that room, but reality is there's 23 more hours in the day. Temperature spikes, humidity spikes, there's all these things that can happen. So I usually tell people they spend an hour every day at a certain time that's like on cue and do all your work. Go back in the room and randomly hit times, like don't go in there every single day at the same time, because what you may not notice is that when the sun comes over to the other side of your house and starts heating up your house from this side, when the room is really cool in the morning and you go in, it feels all nice, but at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, it's up by 15 degrees. That's a huge difference, and that's like heat is probably your number one issue that you'll ever deal with, because we're growing inside in an insulated house that was never designed to have, a ball of light blasting in it all day long. So that if you're growing in your house, you really got to take every room individually, because you'll find that they change throughout the day, especially throughout the seasons. So connecting with nature, connecting with the planet, just in general, it's a really nice feeling when you get it. You know what I mean? Like when you see something wrong with the plant, you responded, it responded back to you in a good way. Now you learn something at that point, you know what I mean? And I tell people a lot of times you should learn from some failure too. That's a part of the deal of getting involved in this thing, is that you gotta go into it with the anticipation that you're not gonna come out like #1 grower the first time. You're gonna end up, you may have problems. Yeah, you have to kind of go into it like with a grain of salt on every time. Another one, which is probably a big point nowadays, is helping friends and family, especially when it comes to like CBD strains. Everyone's all about it now. They're focusing on Colorado. You can't find them in other states. I mean, like my friends just came back from Minnesota, and they were telling me how hard it was to find good cannabis in general, just because of the curing didn't seem right. It was always a bit moist, but to find a CBD strain is almost impossible because nobody's testing them, qualifying if they're really the ones. But that's like a big goal right now for people, is to have medicine for their family available at an affordable rate. Right now, and that's like, to me, that's probably my favorite reason of all the reasons, because at least there's passion behind that, and there's also no monetary gain. It's actually savings, you know what I mean? And if you look at like how medical is in America, this is a sort of saving grace for a lot of people, because chemotherapy is not a great idea in the first place, but it's expensive as hell, and it definitely isn't for the patient. Right? I mean, it's really about profit margins, and it's the biggest money maker in America is cancer. You know what I mean? So for me, I think that's the noblest of all reasons, and at that same point, those are the people that probably need the most help, because they're not doing it from their stoner point of view, that they want to be the best grower, they want to have their own strain or something. They just want to have quality medicine that they can give to their patients. And that's kind of, again, where you want to stick to the organics. In that situation, you always want to stick as much organic as possible. I always like to think about everything that I give to my plant. I don't want to be scared of touching my skin. I don't want to be scared if I'm inhaling it. Of course, there's certain things like guanos and stuff like that you shouldn't be inhaling regardless. But it's still organic, and it would make me feel better than inhaling something that's from Bayer Pharmaceuticals or something, Staying out of trouble, which is kind of getting less and less nowadays. Oh, yeah.
I do have a question.
Sure.
Back to the medicinal recreation thing.
Oh yeah, you're kind of skipping.
As far as like the different strains
Mhm.
and medications that people are on,
Yeah.
say for instance Lyrica.
Mhm.
Lyrica is basically for nerve pain.
Okay.
So it actually, it's actually really not a good idea to combine marijuana with that, but I don't know if that varies with the different strains.
Well, I mean, that's the interesting part where we're at now, is that now we're finally getting a chance to break these strains down, to figure them out, like in a pie chart, what they really are. And I mean, you'll find that some strains, like for instance, the Charlotte's Web, which everybody's always talking about, that's really good for like epilepsy, but it's not good for cancer. It doesn't do anything for cancer really. So that's why certain strains, we definitely need to like hone in on what ones work better for what reasons. But again, the variable part gets it kind of a little hard to make. Like, it's not a double-blind test done by the FDA, so that nobody really takes them 100% serious unless you get to that point. And what you'll find is, like a patient, there'll be a 7-year-old girl who will get great recovery off of it, and then there'll be somebody with the same condition who doesn't feel anything. You know what I mean? So it is very person to person, and that's kind of where, most of the time prescription pills in general aren't the greatest thing to be combining with alcohol or other drugs in general. Cannabis usually has, the thing about cannabis is it has its own built-in security of, well, you can't overdose on it. You're gonna, you are gonna just sleep a bit, and there's not gonna be, it's usually never, and I've never really heard of any heavy reactions because of the cannabis.
Yeah.
It's more like, technically speaking, when somebody goes to the hospital and they've eaten too much space cake or something and they're really out of it, they'll give them a Valium, you know what I mean? And it's like, they're kind of like, really? Like, that's what you guys do? And that's your big way to get everybody
One
to,
drug on top of another.
so it's like they're going to mask it with something else.
So we just pile them all in there.
But
Frustration, right?
yeah, so medicinally though, we are getting a lot more information now, and one of the main things is about this entourage effect, and that's why whole plant preparations are much better. Like when you take a concentrate and you extract it, you're kind of taking out a piece of the pie,
Uh-huh.
and when you have a whole plant extraction, which is like water hash and bubble hash and doing it the kind of the old-fashioned way, let's say, that gives you a complete plant-like concentration from the plant level down to the concentrate, but it's still all of the active ingredients. And what happens there is you get things that really work because they need to work together, and that's where people kind of look at it wrong. They'll kind of go like, yeah, CBD, we need CBD. Well, you don't. You do need something. You need a combination of the two. You need, like, even if it's a 20-part CBD to 1 part THC, that 1 part of THC, along with the CBC, CBG, there's other ones that are there, and it's almost like rolling dice every time. It's like having 9 die and rolling them, and every time you roll them, you might just nail the one, but it's actually 12 terps that they're testing for now, but there's about 200 inside of cannabis, in average on cannabis, 200 terpenoids and terpenes, terpenoids, flavonoids, and these are all the minor components that are the ones that actually overall make the effect, So, yeah, from a medicinal thing, it's definitely we're getting so much more information, and I give it like another 3 years until we crack the entire genome, because right now we're still working on it. And the thing is that it's been the most independently bred plant in the world, because if you look at corn and potatoes and those things, that's the exact opposite. They're like monocultures now, so they have lost, people are just like focusing on 4 strains or maybe 6 strains, and if something goes wrong with any of those strains, then you'll have like the potato famine or something like that, where you lose everything, and that's where, so diversity is the most important thing, and that's the one thing about cannabis which is awesome, is that it's been so overly bred by so many individual people that people think it's gotten worse, but I think it's gotten better because, there's just a plethora of things to work off of. Whereas before, like if it was legalized, say 20 years ago, I bet we would have less strains, not more strains, because they would have said, this is good for this, let's focus on that.
Just rampant crossbreeding, trying to find the right thing.
Well, also people are yield fixated, you know what I mean? So they're like in Holland, where I was living for 20 years, they grow beautiful looking cannabis, giant buds, great yields, but a lot of times it's missing the nuances because they mix it with tobacco, which is a bad idea, so they don't understand the different subtleties, and they're not going for a finished product that they're proud of as much as they're proud of the amount that they grow, and that's not a good goal. The goal is quality over quantity whenever you're working with cannabis in general, because you will find the ones that have high yields, but if you focus on them, you're really looking away from a lot of the strains that are the ones that like the Thai influence strains and the strains that are very low yielding, like back in the day, the Oaxacan strain from Mexico was very popular, and it was buds this long that were about an ounce, you know what I mean, in the end, after you pulled everything off, because it was just, the same bud would have been a quarter pound if it was a big indica or something.
Frail, almost.
Yeah, just like little
it's
wispy.
not dense, there's no density.
Just wispy, but tastes amazing, you know what I mean? And so those strains got lost over time due to the fact that most people just were like, no, yield.
So those were lost landrace strains, basically.
Yeah, I mean, they're still out. I'm sure if you go to Walker, you'll find them, but it just never would. Like, there's a strain called Lester Grinspoon, which is kind of like the similar structure of that, where it just grows these like individual glands. And you look at it and you think as a grower, like, I don't know if I want to grow that one, but if you're a grower / smoker, then you'll understand. You'll be like, well, that's all I want to smoke. So now, you know what I mean? Like, choices.
So you can start crossing your nose.
Yeah, and that's why growing for yourself is such an easy, satisfying thing, because you're not worrying about if you're not worrying about, I have to hit this mark every single time and I want to sell all this stuff. That's where you get lost in the process, and you're not worried about the final product.
Right. I was basically asking, pro or con.
Yeah.
Because, with it being so new to Colorado as far as legalization goes, and people are using it for medicinal reasons, it's, could really be, people are open arms since they bring it in.
Sure.
But then you need to be a little bit more educated about pharmaceuticals with what mix. Because with Lyrica, it actually emulates as though the person's having a stroke.
Oh, really?
Yes.
That's never good.
No, it emulates, they're not.
Yeah.
But they don't know it. And so because...
do they feel the effect? So they feel like they're having it,
Yes.
but they're not having it.
Yes.
That's interesting.
To where they feel
And
like...
the cannabis tends to stimulate that or to excite that?
Yeah, but see, my thought is because there are different strains that, you know, and it's like with Lyrica,
Yeah.
you know, you can mix it with all kinds of different kinds of narcotics,
Sure.
but perhaps, you know, there's the different strains that of marijuana with the same
Well, it's
way.
like I've seen. I mean, it's interesting too because now, like even only let's say about a month ago, I was with somebody and we were had a CBD extract, yeah, and it's got a very specific taste. It tastes like cherry cough drops, yeah, and that's specific to the CBD strains in general. I mean, if you taste that, and if you think about any strains you've ever had that you had that cherry kind of flavor, chances are it was a very high CBD strain. So I was with a guy who actually was in our last class, and he really wanted to try it, and it was like interesting to watch because he literally smoked it, and I watched maybe for 10 minutes where it was like there was nothing. I was like, wow, I've never seen this before. You know, I was kind of late, like, and then he like came back out of it, but it was like so he has something. It was either a combination of the you know what he did or didn't eat during the day, or drink or didn't drink. But it was just very interesting to see how it turned something off, like, and on maybe at the same time. And he was definitely like, you know, mouth open and just gone, you know, like, and he didn't go into any kind of seizures, but I had a feeling like he might, because it was like he's, you know, he had that tense, he was tense, and I was like, never seen this. But I think it's also when you strip everything down like that and you get it down to this sort of narrow band, that if that particular thing affects you, it's going to affect you heavily because there's nothing else there. Because the thing about cannabis that's interesting is it has built-in security, like it's got bronchial dilators, and it opens up your lungs to make it so basically when you're and it kind of gives you a natural protection, and that's in the cannabis, like if you smoke flowers. But when you smoke oils, you don't get those because a lot of times those are not carried through. So in the end, you're not getting the same balance, and that's the whole thing about full plant extractions, is they're really well balanced.
Well, maybe it's still kind of too early then, because the way that I'm foreseeing it is that eventually, if it's embraced and to be mixed with different kinds of medications,
Sure.
you know, it could depend on the different strains,
Oh yeah.
and they could end up making.
Well, that's
those
there
that are
kind of is a
selling
race
it.
right now too for that. Everyone's racing to figure out which strains are
Exactly.
going to be
Right.
the ones, and some people are going to be fortunate enough to have already isolated something. Like there's a strain called Harlequin, which is pretty famous too for CBD strains, and that particular one, there's a guy, the person I got the clone from, is a guy here named Bill Althouse, and he drives around in a limo with driving on hemp oil, and he's like, you know, full on. His whole deal is give this plant away to as many people as possible. And he told me the story of the original guy, and he said that the guy, you know, was walking through his greenhouse every day, and there was this particular plant that literally was like jumping out at him like, hey, look at me, you know, and he was just like, this plant, something's up with this plant, and he went out on a limb literally and just sort of like focused on that one. Turns out it's like a 3-to-1 CBD, but it grows beautifully, it has great structure, it's a kind of all-around winner, you know what I mean, and it was just the fact that he literally heard it. I was like, whoa, this plant's like talking to me, you know what I mean? But it was just like, you gotta kind of sometimes use your intuition.
Symbiosis, kind of. Right?
Yeah, you know, plants are pretty intelligent. we give them a lot less credit than they deserve sometimes. But in general, it's mostly been by feeling, and now we're getting into science, you know what I mean? And now we're basically finding out whether or not we're right. You know, a lot of times it's great, it's a good feeling when you know, like, hey, I knew that plant was special, you know? I have that with, like, one of my strains called Sage. It's just for years.
That's yours.
Yeah,
That's my favorite.
That's
That's
awesome,
what I
guys.
was going for 10 years.
For
That's
years
pretty
and
awesome.
years, that one was like the strain that just had this weird mystical thing about it. No matter who grew it, there was always like, you know, such a love for it, even though it was not anything like any other strain, so it didn't have the same flavors. It could be considered, now the growers were the ones who fell in love with it. The actual smokers were like 50-50. It was like people would be like, I don't like it. And you're like, you don't know nothing, you know what I mean? And other people were like, wow. And then if you locked in on it, you just like really wanted it. And it was because of the medicinal effects were acute, you know what I mean? Like if I was at a festival, like back in Holland, I mean, because in Holland it's really funny, very few people smoke there. It's like 3% of the population. So as an American, where you were just used to everybody smoking, I would go to 50,000 person festival, and nobody would hardly be smoking weed there, and I'd be smoking a joint, and people would come in, hey, can I? And it was just because they all smoked with tobacco, and none of them really smoked good weed anyway. I'd give them like, I usually wait till the end of the joint, and then take it, take it, and then come back like an hour later, like, oh my God, what was that? And it was just because it was like a combination of the fact that the effects were there, it was definitely there, and it was also a unique flavor, but as a grower, it was phenomenal because it was a big yielder, had sativa background though to it, so it was kind of like the best of both worlds. Most of the time sativas are big and wispy, and they take forever, and this one was like 10, 11 weeks maybe max, rock solid, big yield,
Wow.
with the sativa flavor,
Sativa, Yanni, equilibrium.
genetic equilibrium. Yes. That is the
It's my
acronym.
favorite, I've been
I
here
just-
10 years.
I just chopped one
It's-
down,
it's the
16
safest
weeks.
plant in the world.
Yeah, I mean, you can let it go as long as you really like to.
Man, I mean, it was
It's the
just
safest
like,
plant in the world. You will not drive nothing you own over 45 miles an hour. I'm telling you. We named it to 45. Because everybody said, man, I cannot drive over 45 miles an hour. So I know.
That's funny. That's funny. No, and that's been one of my most successful strains because it was literally the thing that I just love, and I just went on my intuition on that one. Bubblegum was the first strain that I put out, and that one was commercially viable, but I couldn't see it as being my long-lasting forever plant. You know what I mean? It was kind of reminded me that's more like kids weed, and then the sage is more like adult weed. And then now it's OG Kush. Is only if that's what they want, if all they want is OG Kush, then they've obviously probably been smoking for 5 years, and they are just following the trends that are out there right now. When diversifying your what you smoke is important too, because you will burn out sort of on certain strains. Having said that, certain ones like sage are really good at not burning you out so bad. You're like, because it just has that more sativa side. Indicas tend to be very lethargic and you'll eat the refrigerator out and wake up the next day all gritty eyed and stuff, you know what I mean? So we're kind of diverting it. And then the last two was so knowing the rules and empowering yourself and getting prepared. Those are all three things that you just kind of have to, as Colorado changes its rules, which is on regular, you have to keep up to date, make sure I don't suggest doing any kind of caregiving situation because that just puts you under the spotlight right now. You pretty much either do it at home or do it professionally. Don't try to do it somewhere in the gray area just because why? We've already got rules in place. We can actually follow them. We've all been waiting for that for our whole lives. It's kind of crazy for people to go out of their way to still break the law when they don't have to. You know what I mean? Now, if you're in another state, this is a totally different situation because, of course, there it's just more about knowing the rules and being prepared for anything, including losing everything in one day, which part of being a grower is every day is literally like a crapshoot because you're running equipment all the time. You're dealing with crops. You're dealing with
security issues.
You're dealing with people. That's the number one security issue, obviously, is people. So if you have a bunch of people coming over to help you manicure, they know exactly the day you're harvesting. They know exactly when your crop's ready. They might not rob you, but their friends might rob you. You know what I mean? Or it's always like that too. It's always one person away, and that's one thing. I'm not going to say that I've been prepared my whole life, that's for sure. But I have had so many situations where it's been I went to the room. I said, "Man, it looks really good. It really looks great." Pat myself on the back. That's about the worst thing you can do because guaranteed, it's like Murphy's Law. You're gonna get that phone call an hour later, "Hey, your house is on fire." It happened to me already twice. Fires are definitely one of the things you got to worry about because you're working with a lot of power. Sometimes old places like in Holland, disastrous because of the fact that the buildings were hundreds of years old. The power situation, I had 16 amps in my house. That's what I had to work with. I was like, 16 amps. I gotta live there too. So I get a fridge.
You got gaming systems.
And you're like, man, how are you gonna make this happen? But still, people would go full out. But of course, the biggest problem over there is people would steal power because they didn't want to. They just diverted it straight off the thing. That'll get you in more trouble than anything. Here in Colorado, I'd say the worst thing you can do is steal power and run a caregiving kind of situation because then you're going to get yourself into a pickle because you're going to just be over your limit plus over your power limit. But that's I think fire is to me the most scary thing ever. After being through two of them, one of them was on a houseboat with 60 lights, and, you know, it was like nothing left, it was like a flat bottom, concrete slab, you know, and at the end of it all, I stood over it, and all I could see was all like 8 can filters that had melted, and all my ballasts that were 3/4 melted, and everything else just
Wiped
you know
out.
what I mean? And so that was, and I know now from standing there and figuring it all out, it was me trying to just max it out way too much. What we had was a thing called the Einstein system, which was a flip-flop, but it wasn't just a flip-flop, it was a temperature-driven flip-flop system. So it's having 12 hours on, 12 hours here. When the temperatures got too high, it would turn half the lights off. But this is back before digital ballasts, so everything was running on everything was analog, so they weren't really designed to take a hit every time. And if it's switching on and off 15 to 20 times in a day, created a weak link, burned down the flame. So sometimes you can be, you know, especially because it was called Einstein, I really thought, wow, that was not the smartest
That was
thing
not
I've ever done in my
yeah.
life. It was not the smartest one I've ever done. But in general, yeah, you want to kind of, let's see. Here's a real simple where to grow. This is a spare bedroom grow in my last place. That kind of a general idea. A lot of times indoors you're going to use air-cooled lights. Now, if I have ideal conditions, I won't use air-cooled lights. I will use completely open bulbs. Due to the fact that nobody cleans their lights enough, that's no matter who you are, if it's a 4-light system or a 400-light system, pretty much every time I look at them, they're like dirty. I mean, they're dirty enough that they should be cleaned. You cleaned them yesterday, really? Well, they're dirty. You know what I mean? It's just because there's a lot of dirt. What happens is in all these lines here, like in every single one of these little like edges, there's going to be a dust collection because that's how it is. It's just kind of, it takes one hit, now it all comes back into your light, it swirls around, gets caught in the corners. You clean it all out, make it all good. As you shut it, it creates a vacuum. It fills the void with all the dirty bit, you know what I mean? So you're just in this never-ending battle. So in general, if you have a brand new place and you have, say, like 12-foot ceilings, then consider open bulbs. Like Gavita's one great company now making them. They're double-ended, 1,000-watt, and open. But you can also get 315s, open bulbs. A lot of right now, the technology for lighting is moving rapidly, so we're actually getting ahead of, I'll talk about that in a minute. That in general, on a small bedroom like this, or an attic, attics are not a great place to grow in general. Too hot, too cold, too cramped, a lot of reasons. Unless you live in a really old place with really high ceilings most of the time, they tend to be a real pain in the ass. A basement is going to be your best bet. It's the most stable temperature-wise. You can also usually isolate smells better. I mean, attics tend to kind of amplify the smell because it's, you know, there's a lot of chances that there's a lot of air movement going in and out. And if not, you're gonna have problems. And then you end up with a lot of neighbors getting too curious about what you're doing. Now, another thing that's awesome about Colorado is most people have like a garage or something like that where they can actually fill it up quite good. This is open bulbs. These are like adjustable wings, which were some of the better ones back in the day. They're like that wing shape. Now, whenever you're buying any of these products, it's always good to look at the original people that make them because a lot of times there's a lot of knockoffs out there, right? So adjustable wings, which are these same shape like this, there's so many knockoffs on the market and they're not the same thing because the real adjustable wings have a glass coating on the actual reflector, and that's like, it keeps it much cleaner for dust and things like that, but it also, it's like having a slight clear layer above where the light goes, so it actually amplifies the light as it hits the reflector and then bounces it back. The other ones are just stamped out aluminum, and they get dull within one crop, and you're pretty much like looking at losing about 20 to 30% of your overall reflectivity, or about 26%, which is a huge amount. If you start thinking like, well, 26% of my light I'm going to lose on the first round, plus the bulb's going to be 8%, now you're talking 35% less, and that's where people get these like, you know, get a good yield on the first crop, and then it just drops progressively down. So in general, like if you're looking at products like that, you know, I always try to like stick with the originals. They're more expensive, but you know, again, at the end of the day, that's why they're $120 a reflector, and the cheap ones are $40. You know what I mean? But for that amount of difference each time, you can pretty much calculate it on paper, and you would have saved. You would have actually made that much more.
Well worth it.
Always worth it.
Now, I see your lights are pretty high up on that.
Yeah, on the right side, that was like, this is at the very end of the cycle, and we were kind of just letting them, kind of relax a little bit. It's more for heat issues because it was the summertime.
Okay.
And, you know, what is interesting too is that you'll find that people tend to come down on top of their plants a little too much sometimes. Like, that's what the thing with the Gavitas and all these open-ended bulbs, we'll hang them at like 8 feet and leave them up there. We won't even bother.
Won't adjust them.
Because you can actually work under them, which is huge. Because the thing about all the lights that are, once you bring it down to a certain point, it's like when you have the glass and you have the open ends on each side, what people don't realize also is if you have an open end, there's a lot of light shooting down each side of those things. So you're not getting any of that light. That's all going down the tubes. And you're also not getting the light that's making it through the glass. You know? So you're losing huge amounts, and that's why you need to come down on top of it, because you're just compensating for all that loss.
Do the Gavitas at that height, do they still put out the same
Oh, yeah.
footprint on the, how they do?
Oh, you get a 5.5 foot, at 8 foot, you get a 5.5 foot spread, and you looking at plants basically, you know, nothing from down to here, but you pretty much have a solid growing area up until right about your eye height, you know, about 5.5, 6 feet, and still have a 2 foot gap for the lights. And you never have to worry about adjusting them up and down. What you're doing is you're creating a footprint. So when you have the lights hanging at the exact same height, they actually create a ball. Each ball of light is now connected, and now you create a grid, which is a perfect even grid. And whereas if you have lights at all different heights in the room, especially like, I mean, this is a bad example because I have lights sideways and forward and stuff, but if you have them when they're like that, you'll end up with a hot spot here, and a cold spot here. You just have different kinds of growth, and that's the idea is always to have kind of as even growth as possible. Now this is a crazy closet grow. This guy just uses CFLs. This is like going the lowest budge. Like go down to Home Depot and make myself good. This is old. This is just
Start a fire.
It's from 420 canvas and everything. So I pulled up some photos to show how extreme people actually will go to save a buck, but it's not a great idea. This is like what not to do kind of throw. Too many cords, too much, you know, there is some growth there, and I mean,
It will work,
he's
but-
proud of it, and it will work. I've seen fluorescent rooms pull together some brand per watt, but it's also like, when you see how much wiring and how much work really went into it, and then you gotta replace all those bulbs, you're like, you got like 400 bulbs in here, you know, even if they're only $3 each, it's $1,200 worth of bulbs when you wanna replace them, you know, and it's very hard to see the lumen difference on a fluorescent compared to like a real bulb. You can actually see if it's been burned out a little bit. And basement, which I was talking about earlier, just for the steadiness of the temperature is almost probably the best part about it. And also for never having to worry about leaks. I mean, attic, if you have a leak in an attic, it can cause so much damage to the house without you ever noticing it. You know, I've seen people with their hydro setups coming dripping down the walls, and then, I mean, you're paying for things you should never have to, and you're exposing yourself. And, you know what I mean? It's like, why is there water leaking from the attic? There's no water in the attic, you know what I mean, normally. So it always is good to be prepared in those kind of situations. And if you're ever, I mean, I've been to places where people have left the water on, which is another classic example of the thing that everybody does. Nobody wants to tell anybody they did it, try to clean it up as fast as they can, but it comes out at the end, you know, it either ruins your floor or it comes, and I mean, I've seen, I'm 100% guilty. So now I have one of those, I always put one of those timers on now because you get a phone call in the middle of filling up your reservoir, that's classic. Start talking to your friend, get off the subject, go make yourself a sandwich, you know, and then all of a sudden there's this like realization, like I was doing something before. You know, at that point, you just know it. Like within an hour, you come downstairs and there's just as much water. You know, it's happened to almost every grower, and it should happen at least once, so that you'll never go out and buy one of those things and figure it out. But basements can save your ass in those situations. I knew a guy who we were sharing a place, and we were out one night, and he basically was like, "Oh, damn. But he's like, you better go home right now. And I was like, why? What's up? He's like, I think I forgot to turn off the water. And I was like, well, what was this? He's like, noon. And I was like, it's midnight, dude. It's 12 hours it's been running. And I got home, and it was amazing because it was a hydro setup that we built, and we had it all up on legs about this high. And it was probably one of the worst built grow rooms I've done in a long time. And we were just lazy. We didn't hang any of the ballasts on the wall. We just had them on boxes on the ground. And the water was about this close to the ballast when I came in. And I was just like, how can this room still be on? It doesn't even make sense. Like, you know, switched it off and managed to get it all out before blowing the main power on the place. But it was like, yeah, it was a classic. And then I looked over at the neighbor's place, and so because of that place being really well built, not a drop of water in his spot, so it was, you know, contained. But if it was on the top floor and had been running for 12 hours, it was like the whole place would have been ruined, you know. So yeah, basements can save you many times. Now a lot of people want to grow inside of containers, and this is another one of those things where it's like, yes, if you happen to have a container, you happen to have a way to move your container around and or it's in a perfect position, but I've seen so many of them go wrong because of the combination of the fact that they're bulky. We had one delivered to a place that I was at, and it wasn't even going to be for growing, it was literally for demonstration. And the driver told the neighbor, oh, it's a grow room, you know, and I was like, what kind of driver are you? Like, you know, so pretty much you know that when that thing comes into your neighborhood with a giant crane and gets delivered to whatever place you're at, it's going to draw a lot of attention. So unless you just happen to have like a piece of property with 10 containers on it, maybe it's useful. But the problem with most of them is they're not insulated very well. They cost a lot to insulate. You lose a pretty, you know, decent gap about this side on each side, and you're already kind of narrow. They're the right height, they're just not the right width. If you could put two of them together, then it starts to become interesting. Like cut out two walls, throw them together. But if you're that, you know, skilled and you have the ability to weld two giant containers together, then you probably should be doing something way more. You should be doing something way more precise, exactly, built for the fact. But having said that, they are convenient in certain situations. There's been plenty of grows where people have buried them, ran them for years, never had a problem. There was one back in the day that was under a tennis court, and it was like nine of them in a row. And there was tennis courts, and they basically had lights that were all set up, and they never used them because all the power was going to the grows, and nobody ever used these things. And it was in the like middle of like the desert, you know. And I was like, so why do we have this like huge, beautiful tennis facility that nobody ever plays at? But yet power is cranking through it. You know what I mean? So they weren't really thinking too smart. So I titled that one "Thinking Inside and Outside the Box" because most people are thinking that they're coming up with something real clever, but the reality is they're actually just repeating the same mistake that a lot of people have made. And also these things, if you bury them, you have to be really careful to reinforce them because the sides will completely cave in on them, even though you think they're solid as hell. Not really, because you'll notice, especially depending on what kind of ground you're putting it into, the ground can be very damaging and it will just crush it. Like you'll come in and the whole sides will be crushing it. So not my favorite idea, but like I said, a lot of people are always thinking about it. And then on the tiniest grow that I've ever seen, something like this, like a micro little, now LEDs give you the ability to grow in tiny little areas, and you know, if it's for personal and you're expecting to get, like that will get you maybe a half an ounce of cannabis at the end of it all. So if it's purely personal, but I have seen a few cool systems. And the thing about LEDs, which I'll also talk about later, is the thing about them that they're getting to the point where they're actually becoming viable. Like they weren't up until even a year ago, in my opinion. They were still not cost effective. You know, it's $1,200 for a unit that you'd be able to buy, say, 4 HIDs to cover 5 times the amount of area. But they are getting now to the point where I see the benefits, especially on larger facilities, because people always think it has to be small. The thing about LEDs, which are interesting, is it's about the leaf temperature, not the room temperature. So they themselves actually produce heat. Everybody thinks LEDs don't produce heat. They do produce actually kind of a lot of heat sometimes, but it's a different kind of heat. It's heat from all of the circuits and things that are coming off the fans. Whereas,
It's not from the bulbs themselves.
yeah, now
basically.
the bulbs themselves, what they do is they create like a radiant heat, which is very, very intense, but also it's like it's creating surface heat on the plants themselves. So they'll be about, an HID will be about 9 to 10 degrees warmer of the leaf temperature with the same amount of wattage, you know? So what happens is with the LEDs, you can run your room at about 84 degrees compared to 72, let's say, which is like your optimal temp. Everybody's always shooting for optimal temperatures, and it's like around, you know, you try to shoot for 72, it's really about 74, but at that point, the leaf temperature is about 90, 95, 92 or something like that, yeah. So, but when you use an LED, what happens is it doesn't create as much leaf temperature, therefore you can use that little gap, that 10-degree gap, which is huge when you start talking on a warehouse. Like if you start talking a warehouse, 10-degree difference on a warehouse is about $20,000 a year in savings because you are not running nearly as much HVAC, that's costing you less. Also, if you run CO2, you can run higher temperatures, so the plants can run faster. So in a sense, if you can combine, it will cost you more money, but now it's getting to the point where I can see LEDs almost catching up. I mean,
Not quite there.
not quite there. It's still-
Supplemental still, really.
I went,
See, I don't know, supplement, I'm not too big fan of supplement lighting with them because they get lost in the, they
Have
get
you-
lost in the room.
What about the Diamond series? Have you ever heard of the,
the 5 milliwatt ones or?
well, it's, Vance LED came out with not too long ago. They said it's kind of got the, I mean, I don't know nothing about the lighting, but from coming from them, it's got a little bit of both.
Chip.
The LED, yeah, the five
Yeah.
ones. Okay, so the LEDs, there's a company in Boulder called
Black Dog.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and they are making probably some of the best LEDs I've seen. That's where those are the guys that convinced me in a sense. Like I went to them, saw their facilities, and was like, huh. They explained to me about the leaf temperature. I hadn't really put that two together, and I was like, okay, valuable piece of information. But also, it's like they do produce because of the temperature difference, you get a different terpene and different terpenoids, and you definitely notice it. Like same with ceramic metal halide, you get the same thing. Like you'll get better flavors and better smells, and it's like less bleached out.
Bleaching.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You don't get that bleached out
Yeah.
flare, you know what I mean? Where you get like a whole big bud, and it's like I don't smoke big buds. If I go to a room and I see all these giant, huge buds, I'm not interested. You know, I'm
Yeah.
looking at the ones around the edges of those that are the tasty ones because it seems like plants definitely like flavor exits through the big bud. You know what I mean? It's like, and it stays in those smaller ones.
Why is that?
It's because of the
Is it because they're
it's
closer to the
growing
light?
faster. Well, every tip that's closer to the light is growing so much faster. That's why you'll get that bleached out effect because they'll come too
Right.
close to the lights during the growth time. So like basically, you're in there for 1 hour a day. During that 1 hour, you notice the difference from yesterday, but like sometimes it's so subtle you won't notice it. But then after maybe 3 days, you really noticed it. But then it's already too late because the plants have already
Right.
burnt at the tips and done those things. So LEDs kind of eliminate that whole bleaching and that burning, and you definitely get more terpenes and flavors coming out of it.
but they're expensive.
The cost is still
Oh,
kind of
yeah.
rough.
Because
Like
it's
California Lightworks stuff, I mean, I don't even know much about it. I've seen it being used and it seems good, but
Yes.
it's highly expensive
I
stuff.
met with a guy in California there in January, and his was $2,500 a piece.
I know. And then
And
like
then-
1,200 is about the cheap. Well, with the Black Dog guys, if you go to them, you can say the same thing. You just say Adam Dunn Show. They give you like a 10% off, but still it's like, you know, you're talking, I think they were like 1,600 new.
Right.
So you'll get $160 off or
Yeah.
whatever. So it's still not too cheap, that's for sure. But again, like they last longer, they're more efficient. So there's definitely advantages. I mean, you won't have to replace. The thing that's good about the Black Dog guys too is because they're in Boulder, you can just bring it to them
Yeah.
and they can fix and replace anything. Whether you get it from Sunlight, you know, they're gonna send it to wherever, and you might get a replacement.
And then by the time I got done talking to the guy, he said that his LEDs were good, but yeah, he wanted to drop 600 waters in every now and then to help him out.
Right. See, that's kind of where
So that's,
until it's at the point where it can be a standalone product.
That's what
Probably,
I'm
but
Right.
the thing about supplement lighting is it's almost impossible to make an even room at that point because
yeah.
the best way to do that old-fashioned way before LEDs in general is you would take, say for instance, for every 4 sodiums, you'd hang 1 metal halide above them and it would blend in that light because you don't need not 1 to 1 because that's too much, it makes them too confused, and you don't need them to be as intense. Like you could put a 600 watt metal halide above 4,000 watts, and you get enough through there to give the plants enough blue light that they would respond. Because also the thing that people don't get too is plants don't need it all day long. You know, they can have short bursts of certain colors
Halide
and they'll respond fine. And a lot of times, that's kind of, I think, what the future's gonna be, is everybody kind of dialing in what the plant needs and what the plant doesn't need, because right now what we're doing is we're just bombarding them with massive amounts of everything. They're taking in what they can take in, but they're not necessarily benefiting because of, like, you'll notice sometimes when you ease back, things go better, because you've been like, if the plant starts to get really green, like so green, unnaturally green, then it means it's locking up, it's getting too much nutrient. Basically, at that point, you're definitely not benefiting the plant, and just by flushing it a little bit, and like pulling back, you'll notice them respond, become much happier. If the plant's leaves get too crispy like that, you know you're also giving them too much food. Tips will burn, that's obviously like when it's, now you're getting really excessive. Right before they burn though, they'll be real brittle, and you know that's a good sign that what you want to do is flush them until they're just a little more flexible again. And it's like every time you touch the plant, it's not breaking a branch off or breaking a leaf off. That's always a good indicator that you may be over loving your plants a little bit. You know? Here's to show you how complicated people can make things.
Oh my god.
Wow.
So like I go to rooms and I'll see people like, you know, the buds are decent underneath and stuff, but I'll come in and I'll just be like, do you understand how inefficient this room is? You know what I mean? It's like, and I just kind of titled it like Big Systems, Big Problems, because a lot of people, of course, you know, especially after they've grown their 10 light system and they feel like they've dialed it in, now they want to go with a 100 light system. Well, you can't just multiply it by 10 and expect that to be the final answer. It really comes down to simplifying things, especially like in this situation, he has high enough ceilings. He definitely has a decent HVAC because it looks like it's huge. What's the point of having every single thing in there air cooled so that at the end of the day, it's like, you know, you probably have what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 corners on each one, and every single bend is an 18% decrease in flow. So if you bend the thing 6 times, you pretty much brought it down to zero almost.
Kind of useless to have it even in there.
Yeah, and this guy, whoever built this room, definitely all he needed to do is take into consideration that if he's spending that much money on the HVAC, he definitely does not need to separate the light heat from the room heat. And what happens is you also, I've seen rooms like this where the rooms end up being too cold now because they don't have enough ambient heat, you know what I mean? It's like, okay, we don't want it to be too hot, that's for sure. But we also do want to create a kind of an ecosystem within the room. You can tell a good room when you go into it because it'll have enough moisture. You don't want to have it so dry that the plants are suffering because it's great at the very end of flower, but not during, especially during veg, pre-flower, you know, in that early flowering stages. You need some humidity for those plants to kind of keep things rolling. And so when you air cool all your stuff and you have all these complicated things, you actually pretty much killed all your airflow, but you also, you know, there's so much like wasted space because look at these plants down here, and then look at how much space is above here. Now the lights should be up here, and these plants should be filling up to there. You know, it's like that's
major hotspots.
yeah. It's just efficiency is really. I mean, it's easy when you go into somebody's place and it's a big mess. You can go like, wow, here, fix this, and you've just helped them out by like probably 30%. But it's a lot easier to map it out properly at the beginning when you have an empty room. So with the bigger systems, I think the problem is a lot of times it's small-time growers thinking that they, you know, I saw a guy online the other day who was claiming he was going to get 5,000 pounds a year out of a 5,000 square foot grow facility. You know what I mean? He's like,
That's awesome.
You're trying to tell me to get a pound per square foot.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
you know, and it's like, and you start to calculate it by, you're like, it's literally, it's impossible. You can get 50 pounds, you get 500 pounds possibly. Like you get 50 pounds a cycle with half the amount, but you could double it up, and there's ways you can get around it, possibly 500, 5,000. So that's the thing is like a lot of times people have these huge anticipations, and the amount of money that was spent on this room is just phenomenal if you think about it. And then, you know, literally the first thing I tell them as a consultant is tear every single thing out that you've done and let's redo this. You know, and they'd be like, "Well, we spent $1 million on this." There's been many $1 million rooms built in Denver, and probably none of them are operating like they were at the beginning. You know, they've all been torn out and redesigned because, like, the Medicine Man was the closest one that I've seen, which is a well-designed room, like. But still, even that, they really went for the classics where they tried to do everything in double levels, and it works to a point, but on paper everything works, you know what I mean? Like, oh, double the level means double the yield. Well, actually it means double the work and sometimes the same yield, if not less, because you've cut 2 rooms in half now, reduced their overall footprint. Now you can't get the 12 foot, you're not gonna get the 12-foot height ceilings. You're gonna have 2 8-foot high ceilings, and each of those 8s are gonna lose, and then you only have 2 narrow bands to grow in.
Yeah, for Scrog or something.
Yeah, I mean, there you go, Scrog. Good. Next picture.
There you go, bro.
So this is the soil garden, all kind of scrubbed out, and there's only 6 plants, I think, in this picture, so it's like, just kind of like, maximize small areas. In my opinion, even though everybody thinks hydro, of course, maximizes it, well, a lot of times the thing about hydro is it needs the system in the room itself, and that has to be at a certain height for drainage. You're not gonna put a hydro system straight on the ground. And with soil, you have the convenience of being able to move the plants around a little bit. These are all just on individual, like, squares with wheels and a scrog for each of them, and then I can kind of play Tetris with my foot, move them around. Another thing in a room you really gotta think about, especially, when you're by yourself in a room and you're trying to pick up heavy stuff, you can really throw out your back. I've seen people get really screwed up. So if you can put anything on wheels, whether it's a whole table or an individual plant, it makes a huge difference for you and for the plants themselves too, because you would cause more damage than good trying to pick up heavy plants and banging them around. They don't like that. Roots aren't really happy when they get banged around too much. But also, just in general, I mean, it's I've seen people working in rooms and really, getting some predicaments because they didn't realize that they're overshooting it, and now all of a sudden they're, kind of like crippled almost. But soil, in my opinion, again, for small gardens, is way more. It's way more user friendly. If you go out to, you're at Red Rocks this weekend, and then all of a sudden you got free tickets for the next show, and you're like, yeah, hell yeah, and you go 2 nights in a row instead of 1 night, come home and all your stuff's all shriveled up. On a hydro system, if you screwed up, it could be like detrimental to the point where you're not going to get recovery. I've seen soil plants pretty beaten up by their owners or neglected and bounced out of it and actually did something. So I definitely recommend on the first, anything that's new and also just experimenting with different strains and stuff. It's a lot easier because they'll know what to take from the soil that you give them. As long as you give them a complete kind of soil mix, they'll take what they need. Whereas on hydro, it's specific to the week and the strain, and it might be like you're giving them way too much nitrogen, and they're responding by throwing out single leaves or something, and you're like, hey, what's wrong with my plant? Well, it's just because that plant doesn't, you don't know that plant yet. You're feeding it like a grow food when it needs to be a flower. It's already should have been a flower 2 weeks ago. Can't really tell you, But other ways is soilless, which is a little bit more forgiving when you want to do straight out of the bottles formula. Like if you're about to go out, if you really want to keep it easy, soilless is like the easiest way. It's a combination of, it's a bit of both, because you have the forgiving of the soil, so you have that, like, yes, you can, push it to one extreme or the other and it will still bounce out, but you also, the soilless, I should say, it's not a nutrient-rich medium. It's still just kind of holding the plant there, and you're feeding it, either like a pre-done formula, which obviously most people, now that there's so much selection, if you go to a grow shop, it's like, oh my God, it's like going to a cereal aisle, and you're just like,
It's ridiculous.
how many products can there be? And the key on those is like, with the soilless, you do a complete program, and what you do is you do work. I mean, I always take, if I'm going to start with a whole new, company, I make sure that I use everything that they say, except for advanced nutrients, because they use everything in the world, and you're like, I can't afford this, But you get if they have like less say than 7 components is about the max. 5 is kind of what I usually shoot for. 7 if you're including enzymes and a few other products. Because what happened was, up until about 5 years ago, pretty much everything was an A, B, a micro, and you may have 1 or 2 other catalysts that you put in there. Now, it's trying to pretty much break it down to as many products as possible so that you need to buy them all. But having said that, if you shoot for around the top 5 main products of almost any company, first round, stick to the label to a point, drop it about 20-30% on any kind of feedings, because they'll definitely tell you to use more than, it's like shampoo, make sure you put 5 pumps in there, I don't think they need 5 pumps, you do 1, it'll probably work, but in general, they want you to use the maximum that they can use. And they'll tell you to run ECs, which is the amount of food, they'll tell you to run that extremely high sometimes, and I always tell everybody that we bring that down, and the actual amount, and then kind of work your way up. But Soilless is definitely forgiving. ProMix is kind of like one of the most famous ones, and you really gotta. The only thing with Soilless is you do have to be on top of it with your watering a little more than with soil, because soil might be every 2 days or every 3 days, and Soilless every 1.5 days. So there's more watering to be done because it's much more porous, but especially first couple rounds, it's not a bad idea just because you don't have to think so much about your soil warmed up. Then you have deep water culture. Hydro to its extreme because it's only using water. There's no real medium except for a few rocks to hold together your cutting. It's in oxygen-rich water. There's a company called Undercurrent. Probably a bunch of you guys might know that one. It's pretty awesome, but it's also a big pain in the ass. You know what I mean? And it's one of those things where if you like to clean stuff, then this is your system right here. Because what will happen is the first time you get it, you'll spend all this money, you'll hook up all these things, you'll have a couple leaks here and there, you'll fix those leaks, you may become a master of it, but doesn't matter when you harvest, someone's got to clean that thing. And it's usually caked in calcium, it's very hard to scrub off, tends to get clogged sometimes, parts tend to get really worn out pretty fast. And so what you'll end up with is, like a $5,000 machine that you'd be so proud of at one time, and now about the third cycle in, you just nobody wants to deal with it anymore. So I tell people, for deep water culture, if you're going to do an individual plant, that's a pretty cool way to do it. You'll get a pound per plant indoor, no problem. I know people that do it all the time. So it's, I think, probably one of the biggest yielding ways to grow. But it's also like having a Ferrari where you just screw up one little thing and it's all out of whack, you know what I mean? Like everything has to be running perfectly. So if the pump goes out and you're not home, you come home and they're all wilted, they'll come back, but they've definitely been damaged, you know what I mean? And each time you do that, your yields go down. You can see here, like on this one, like the roots are just a little bit yellow on this, and there's times where like they'll be perfectly white and beautiful and healthy, and then overnight you'll get like a pythium or something like that in the room, and you'll start to see brown tips, and maybe 48 hours later they're all dead. The roots are all dead. So it's kind of like, it's a bit rough. It's like having your grandma on life support at the house all day long. You know what I mean? You're just like, one plug away from screwing it up. You know what I mean? You're like, oh, unplug grandma. Oh, you know what I mean? So you're pretty much, it's like your precious plant is now on a life support system. So I tell people for DWC, yes, if you're a tinkerer and you love to get in there and play with stuff and adjust things and twiddle knobs and do that kind of stuff, then you'll like it because you do constantly have to keep an eye on it. And I've had to move them a couple times, and that's a nightmare. Like it's impossible. Like you try, but everything you do is just damaging that plant. Whereas if it's a soil plant, wrap that thing up, throw it in the back of a truck or a car or whatever, lay it sideways, do whatever you got to do, get it back to the next place. It'll be fine. You know what I mean? That's why I'm always pushing soil on people, because I think from a final getting to the final end thing is definitely the way to do it. The aeroponics is like your classic. Anybody who hasn't grown wants to grow this way because it seems so high tech and cool. Again, same problems as far as you're critical because you're on all your oxygen is coming from the root zone. That's going to come from the pump. If that pump fails, or if it gets too warm, the water gets too warm, your oxygen levels drop. Now your plants are suffering. So you really have to have everything optimal at all times. And when sprayers get clogged, then that plant suffers, and if you have I've been to rooms, like in Holland, everything is hydro, so everybody, that's how I started, and everybody it had to be hydro, they didn't even want to think about soil, so I just went through so many times where I'd look at a room and be like, what's going on over there, and finally, another clogged spray. I sit there for 2 hours, cleaning out every single sprayer, only to know that the next day, it'll be the same thing again, because it get to a point where you're like on a never ending, it's like painting a bridge, you know, you just never stop. You get to the other end, it's starting to peel again, I have to go back. So aeroponics is, again, great for making clones when you get an easy cloner. Same idea, it's just spraying water on the bottom. That's a great way to make clones because it's pretty user friendly. I mean, I tell people I can make roots on a match, you know, I mean, just give me a match, I'll put it in there, roots will pop out of it because it's literally like no brainer. But when it comes to all the way through the entire plant cycle, aeroponics tends to be tough because it's really designed for like 7 to 14 day crops like lettuces and things like that. They grow real quick, or basil, 3-week plant. It's all leaf, there's no real structure to the plant. You notice they have scrog on top, they have to, because if there's like very little control of the stem there. So have a cup maybe this big. I mean, the cool part with aeroponics is in general, if you see like, I've seen banana trees growing out of a 5-gallon bucket that are this big above the bucket. So they're bigger than the bucket coming out of the bucket just because they have that hooked up to 100 gallons, like a Texas controller they call it. And you see like, wow, what's a tubular? So it's not the same as cannabis, but it just shows you that it can grow a 7 or 8 foot tall banana plant out of a 5-gallon bucket. Awesome, but then again, what happens when, you know, like that will definitely die when it doesn't have water to it. It's a little weird. And then NFT flood and drain, which is just basically recirculating and having rock wool blocks and running the water through the rock wool blocks. This is a way that a lot of growers are doing it here for on tables. They'll just have big flood tables, lay out their plants, flood and drain. It's very cost effective, but it's also like you're sharing, every single plant is now sharing the same water, and so if you have a problem, it just runs rampant through your thing. It's almost like all these systems, like aeroponics, NFT, DWC, when they're interconnected, it's a lot like the bioindustry. And one of the things that I'm very anti-bioindustry because a lot of times they just think of things how to like maximize everything, but they also have every say 6 months to a year there'll be an infestation of something, and they'll just have to wipe it all clean. And you know, it's really horrible when you start talking about animals because you're like, really, it's going to kill all these things and not use them, and it's disgusting. But when it comes to plants, of course, I mean, there's a little bit less, but for you, it's a bigger part loss because you're going to lose it all at once. You know, instead of isolating, you know, if it's on soil, each one is in their own little island, and as long as you can kind of maintain each island, you should be okay. So before you ever start growing, one of the main things you've got to figure out is whether you're going to start from seeds or from clones. Obviously, I'm a seed guy, so I'm going to tell you seeds. But there's a lot more reasons than just that, just the fact that I'm a seed breeder. Seeds themselves are, they have much more vigor as a plant. If you take a clone plant next to a seed plant, you just measure how deep that first initial rooting will go. Because there's not really like a tap root to speak of on a clone. A clone actually produces a lot of roots because they're kind of coming out as a cluster. So you'll end up with a whole bunch of roots shooting down and going to a certain depth. Whereas when you take a seed, you'll end up with a real tap root that really forces its way down. It goes as deep as it can go and it spreads out as much in every direction also. But that tap root is like special in the sense that it is it's like the true heart of the plant, you know, and that's how I always try to, like, if I do a thing from seed, I try to keep that original seed as my mom, take clones from that, flower those out, and test everything that way. I don't test my seed plant because my seed, I'll never go back. I'll never be able to go back to that seed plant. Always, everything from that point on is a clone. So a lot of people get this misconception about, you know, oh, but if you clone a clone, and then a clone, and then a clone, it's definitely going to be weaker. Well, that's sort of true, but not totally. It's actually, it's not automatic. It's not like you automatically fail because you create a clone. It's going to be less and less and less. What happens is you expose yourself every single time while you're making a clone. You expose that plant to a plethora of problems where you can have, for instance, viral conditions. Say you have a virus within your room, you're unaware of it, and you cut one plant with it, and now you transfer it to the next plant because you're making cuttings and you're not cleaning your blade in between. Well, the difference between you know, having a seed plant clone is the same as I was saying earlier, is like clones don't have the resistance built into them. If they may have, or they may not have it. If they don't have, they all don't have it. It's not like one's gonna become more resistant than the others. Seed plants tend to be much more resistant because they have what's called hybrid vigor. So you have two plants that are both independent and they have their own weaknesses and they have their own strengths. When you combine them, the idea is to balance them out, but also to obviously strengthen things that will weaken this one and vice versa. When you make clones, there's a certain, obviously the idea of making clones is that the plant should be good to begin with. Not always true though. Many people just clone stuff because it's a female, start cloning the hell out of it. Now what have you put out into the world? Could be something awesome. Could be just a bunch of crap. And people get this assumption that because it's a clone, it's going to be perfect. You know what I mean? It's going to be the best. Well, there's plants out there that are so powdery mildew susceptible, or spider mite susceptible, or they have weaknesses to certain conditions. First plant in the room, like a sour diesel, for instance, is a very powdery mildew susceptible plant. I can pretty much guarantee if you have it in your room and there's any kind of conditions for powdery mildew, that'll be your vector. That'll be your indicator. Like, wow, I see a little bit on this one. Well, that's the first one because it has that inherent weakness. We love that strain, so nobody wants to get rid of it. So people tend to just keep cloning it over and over and over and over again without ever taking into consideration that you're actually handing kind of like a powdery mildew bomb to somebody. And that's to me, from an experience point of view, I'd rather start seeds, go through them myself, eliminate what I don't like, and then kind of work from there. Clones are great for people who they want to have something that they guarantee they know what it is. Like for instance, Blue Dream, easy to grow plant. So people make a shitload of clones of it every year, and they go out and people grow it every year, but yet nobody wants to buy it. Like on the market, nobody. Like they're like, nah. Except it has a very good packaging. You can package it and sit on it for 6 months, pull it out 6 months later. Now it's all dry. It's in July or whatever. Now people start to buy it, but nobody would buy it straight after the season because it's like the most common, easiest to grow, has the least amount of problems, so people tend to go for it. You know what I mean? So there's certain clone strains out there that are cloned for a reason that makes sense. Others are like notoriously pain in the ass. Larry OG's pain in the ass to grow, very hard to grow, but special in its makeup, So for conservation, clones are good, but for production, people should really aim towards seeds, and most people don't because they're scared because they think it's going to be complicated to separate the males and the females, and that's not at all because of the timing. Also, males tend to pop out way earlier. Gives you a lot of chance to figure it out. And there's a few techniques that you can do, which I'll explain in a minute.
What if you only obtain female seeds? You don't have to worry about male.
Like feminized? Well, see, feminized is another, I'll show you that. That feminized is another one of those touchy subjects. Probably number one question I get asked is LED lights and feminized seeds. Those are like the two things that people tend to be really interested in. Feminized, there's a couple different things. You have feminized plants, and then you have what they call all female. There's differences between them. The thing is that when you have feminized, true feminized seeds, the idea is that you're using you take a female, you switch it with, you basically flip it with either colchicine or gibberellic acid or silver nitrate solution, and then what you're doing is you're stressing the plant out, and to me, what I would use those things for is I use those things as my test to see what I don't want to breed with. So if it flips on me, I don't use it. That's how I use it, because I'm like, you know what, this is actually the best test for that, because what happens is when you spray them, say you spray a plant with silver nitrate or something, and if it flips in 24 hours or 48 hours, it's a very weak plant to begin with. You know what I mean? That was not your plant you wanted as your main plant. Because that's the problem with a lot of times. Okay, the main thing you're trying to avoid is hermaphroditism, which is a pain in the ass because you just went through all this amount of work and now male flowers popped out. And our whole point of growing was to produce said seed, right? So when you do that with feminize, what happens is, in my opinion, you're creating like kind of a weak starting point, and now you're going to grow in a room that you better have perfect conditions, you better not have any light leaks, you better not get it too hot, you better not get it too cold. You got all these things where the plant could just flip on you because now you're putting kind of weak genetics in a room. Whereas when you do regular seeds, you do have to separate the males and the females. That's the biggest hurdle. But once you've done that, you'll still have variables within them. You'll have plants that are, just like you'll have people. I mean, everything is not black and white. It's not like we have men and we have women, or we have male plants and we have female plants. We have both. We have plants that are hermaphrodites, straight down the middle. We have plants that are about 70-30. We have plants that are the opposite direction. So you have plants that can have very like masculine in a plant sort of term. That's like a really pure male, never flip on you, like an alpha male almost. And you can have ones that'll be a male, but if you just give it a little bit of stress, it'll flip on you. Or you give it a lot of stress and it'll flip. So depending on the varying degrees. And so certain strains are rock solid. You can walk in the room, I left my lights on, I walk in the room, and you'll end up with no flowers kind of developing. You'll have other plants where there'll be a slight crack in the room, and it just hits that plant on the right spot, and it gets male flowers developing like that, And so then you're like, wow, that plant was really, like, it's coming from that beam of light, hit that plant, and that plant produced male flowers on that spot. So those are like weaknesses that could be avoided by just finding plants that are a bit more solid. Same as with pest control, same thing, because when you're dealing with plants that have, for instance, powdery mildew, or they're mite susceptible, or things like that, by eliminating them from the room, you automatically gain that much percentage better, chance of keeping that pest or that disease out of your room. Whereas if you have these ones that are just like, that's what they get every time, and your conditions maybe call for it, especially like powdery mildew is really prevalent when you go into like temperature swings. So like spring and fall, as your temperatures are changing and you've got like, for instance, cold air coming into the room, but it's mixing with warm air, you'll notice that right where it's mixing and right lower in the plant is where it'll start to develop. It won't develop like at the tops of the plants, that's why you don't see it. A lot of times you walk in the room, don't see anything, but if you just bend down and you look at the stem, you start to see a little bit of a white downy fuzz kind of growing there. That's your powdery mildew, and that's literally because of the hot and cold temperatures. Now the upper part of the room will probably be warmer than the bottom part of the room because the canopy is now covering it, taking all the heat from the lights, reflect anything that's, so the lights, like if you look at them with UV glasses, you'll notice that the leaves are like black because they're taking in all that, and wherever there's disease or something, it'll be lighter. So yeah, I think can't really emphasize enough how much better seeds are than clones, but once you have grown those seeds out, you can make clones from your own thing. That's not a problem. It's just when you bring in clones from other people, that's when you always have a problem. That's when you end up with diseases that you didn't have, and it's a bad start. So especially if you got a clean room that no one's ever grown in before, try to go from seed. That way you don't have these problems. You'll lose some time. That's the biggest problem. Most people are all about time. They want to have like a crop in 8 weeks. It's going to be a 12 to 14 week situation if you're going to grow from seed, but it's only one time. And after that, you're making your own clones. You have your own moms, and therefore you don't have to add that time onto it. Let's see. So starting seeds. This is in rock wool, which is not really my favorite technique, but it is easy for photos to see what's going on. Now with rock wool, if you're going to do that, you're going to pH. The key to rock wool in general is that you need to pre-soak it properly. That's like you're setting the standard for the rest of that plant's life. If you soak it, if you say you just throw it in plain water and you don't pH the water, it'll sit at around 8.5 pH. So the plants are definitely not going to respond the way they should. When you soak it at around 5.5 pH. The rock wool itself is about 8.1. So it balances out at around 6.5. And that's the idea, is that you're kind of compensating, you're overcompensating, so that way it will come in at the right level. That's the biggest learning curve on hydro, is that it's not about exactly what you're reading, it's about understanding that you're gonna put it in lower, it's gonna come out a little bit higher, but it's gonna balance all out, and it's gonna stabilize after a few weeks, and you won't have to compensate so hard every time. But in the very beginning, like I said, just soaking them really good. After like about 2-3 days, they'll have popped out. They may need a little bit of help like this one, where the seed's kind of just hanging in there. In general, I mean, probably like 1 out of 100 will all get stuck where you have to like reach birth or something. You have to get in there with 2 hands. Just be super careful. The oils on your, like, you know, if you smoke cigarettes especially, wear gloves. Tobacco is one of the worst things to really get on cannabis, and a lot of people don't realize it. They're chain smoking cigarettes and going in their room and wondering why their plants are looking a little bit weird. Because we use it for pesticide. You know, it's definitely toxic to cannabis. So people don't seem to think about it sometimes. But yeah, if you're gonna get those, I mean, use tweezers if possible. This is just a bunch of little starts. And you'll notice in the beginning, I mean, a lot of times plants will all start off looking exactly the same, very uniform, but they'll quickly change, and you'll see a lot of variables within them. It's good to keep everything grouped up so that, like, for instance, if you have a few stragglers, leave them behind together and don't try to put them in with you, because they're gonna get overgrown by the other guys anyway.
I got a question on
Sure.
your strains, like yours, when I grow them out, if I grow 10, 8 of them all look identical when I get, is that stabilization of strains what?
Yeah, the more stable the strain, then the more the uniformity you'll get. F1s, which are your first generation, that's the ones that'll be kind of variable, they won't be as stable. F6, like F5, F6 is what we usually sell as breed, like once it's a stabilized strain. And that means it's been at least 6 times grown over, back into itself and or grown out to basically wean out the ones that are different. You know, what you'll get is, now F1s, you'll get some of the best and some of the worst. That's why it's actually a lot of companies, that's as far as they go, because they know, well,
Somebody
afterwards
use
they're
one
gonna
from others.
get something out of it, you know what I mean? But when you want to truly stabilize stuff, like for instance, bubblegum and sage are probably my most stable because they're my oldest strains, so it's 20 plus years. You know, I'm not even counting what generation I'm on. It's like hard to figure out at this point. But in general, they are easiest for me to predict, you know.
Dark stars too.
Dark Star's a great plant, yeah.
Love it.
Now, so pitfalls of clones and cloning for sex are 2 things. Now, pitfalls are obviously, I picked out ones that weren't the greatest looking clones, but not the worst either. But in general, kind of discussed already the pitfalls being that they're going to be susceptible to the same things. That's one of the deals. Also, it's like, you know, if you're besides the fact that you're going to pass around diseases, that's usually the biggest problem. You know, each time that you take a cut, like I was saying earlier, there is a susceptibility for them to pick up a virus or pick up something. And the best analogy I would think is like back in the day when we used to when everybody would make a tape still. If you were like really into it, you'd go buy a master metal tape, right? And that'd be like your one that you keep at home. You never would bring that out on the road or anything. But you'd make from those copies. Now, there would be other guys who didn't give a shit, and they just go out and buy whatever and start making copies off of copies off of copies off of copies. And what you notice is if there's a little crackle in one, it's going to be a crackle in the next one. If there's a little, so it kind of ends up coming down to cleanliness and organization, which is sort of like that kid that was really anal and had his metal tape and made sure all his stuff was labeled properly and never put it in the sun. People would end up buying things off of him because he had the best quality, whereas every kid, he did a copy off a copy and did an old tape and recopied over that one, and you know, not gonna be the guy you want to get the copies from. So kind of the same, and it is a real simple way of realizing that it's not genetic. It's not like every single time you cross it, you're losing some genetic part of the plant. That's what a lot of people kind of misinterpret. It's not that possible, and not even possible to do that, but there is that chance that you're replicating the same problem over and over and over again, you know, which is definitely, like, you can see it within, like, sometimes you'll see like a crinkled leaf, like maybe the plant never had it, but now all of a sudden you get one leaf that just crinkles, and then the next one you take a cut from that, and that leaf does the same, that plant does the same thing. So you know that's a virus or something that's in the plant, and it's permanent, you know, it's gonna keep coming out. sometimes they're cool, like for instance, Chem Dog has a variation in the leaves, and it's very easy for you to spot whether it's a real Chem Dog or not, because it'll look like it'll have like stripes in the leaves.
Pattern kind of?
Yeah, you get a little sort of stripe going, like a white, like you'll have like, green and then white and green and then white and green and then white in the veins, interveinal. And so it's not, we know because the plant is a great plant, it doesn't really affect the quality of the plant, but it will freak people out. You're like, my plant's, what is this? And it's like, actually, you got a real one. And so that's, sometimes it's, it could become an indicator down the road.
A Dalmatian with real spots.
Yeah, and so if it helps people for knowing if it's the real deal. And then let's see some other weird. Oh yeah, for cloning for sex. Sorry, down here on the bottom. A good technique for cloning, using clones for not necessarily for growing. It's just for indicating. So the cloning for sex, what we would do is, for instance, you have a lot of plants and you want to keep them in veg because you want to create big mobs. And so, say 3 or 4 weeks in, when you can get the first 2 cuts off of the plants, you would cut the clones and root them at 12 hours. And you wouldn't use those clones for anything other than figuring out whether they're male or female. So it takes about the same amount of time for it to make roots as it does to make flowers. So within those 2 weeks, like 10 days, say 7 to 10 days, up to 2 weeks would be about your indicator. During that time, your original seed plants are growing healthy. You've been, pruning them back to keep them nice and structured. But you can then go and say, aha, number 1 is a male, number 3 is a female. And you can go and you throw those clones away. You don't use them because they've already done their deal. They're this big with either a male flower or a female flower. But it's a great way to guaranteed know what you got without ever having to switch over your main plant from seed. And then by the time you figured it out in those 2 weeks, now those plants, you can go back and eliminate the ones that you're not going to use. You didn't have to repot them, go to the next step, then flower them, then find out, and pull them out. It's a lot of wasted time and space. So that to me is probably one of the most beneficial ways of using cloning, because you're kind of like using it to save time and space and money, which are all kind of indicators of final success. And
How
then
do you choose your male for breeding?
How do you choose them? I mean, you got to, again, it's kind of like with the whole CBD story about how the guy just sort of spotted it because he's special.
Jumped out.
You look
A
at
little
one and
bit
say, I like what that one
I
is.
usually go by thinking it's a female, I thinking it's going to be the one, and then all of a sudden it's a male.
They go with
It doesn't stretch out too much because what happens is a lot of times they will stretch out a ton. They'll look beautiful and really robust, and they're going to be the one, and then you hit them in the flower and they go, ooh, they just drop over on you, and you're like, that's not the one. So other times they won't. Other times they'll stay solid and look like they're going to be. Smell's a big indicator. Texture of the plant, because what I look for is like a rubbery quality, kind of like how sage has this. When you're cutting sage buds and they fall into a bucket, they make a certain noise. Yeah. Whereas if you cut other plants, they kind of just. Like, I don't want the fluff. I want you to take the bottom of the bucket, it makes a little noise. And it has a rubbery quality to it, and that rubbery quality is it's why the final product is so nice off of it, because it has a sort of enough moisture left in the plant. It doesn't dry like some plants just dry, they keep drying.
It's brittle.
They lose everything, and they look great on the plant, and all of a sudden you're like, what happened to it all? And it's the overall resin to leaf ratios that are finalized, and so sometimes you get ones that are, they have they grow like a 100-gram plant, but there's only 11 grams of resin. Then you have other plants that grow a 100-gram plant, and then you separate the resin and you get 30 grams of resin. Well, that's when we're actually trying to grow resin. We're not trying to grow plants. So we're really putting plants are the carrier of the resin. So at the end of the day, your best way to indicate what plants are the best is to do a hash run from every single one of them, and then look at those numbers and start figuring those ones out, because sometimes you'd be really surprised if you have like a big bud variety or something like that, and it looks awesome. Not much in the yield of the resin, so you'll get like there's a 6% resin. So I tell people, gram per watt is nice, but it's how many grams of resin per
flower.
per gram of, or per ounce of weed. So it's kind of like you have to take it one step further. To finally finish up. this is another kind of like, it's a great survival technique. Like if you have a plant that's really special and you need to keep it, but it's the only one you have. It's in the pot, it's alive. It's like you're maybe feeling like, timing's not there or something. This is basically taking a plant and scraping it up enough, getting some rooting hormone on there, and then wrapping it and basically keeping it moist, and then rooting it on the plant itself. And then when the roots have developed enough, you cut the whole branch off and replant that whole branch.
That's crazy.
You never have to take it off the plant. So it's kind of like a way that the plant produces, keeps it alive for the whole time. You don't have to build a separate area. It's not technically going to get you a huge amount. It's a lot of work, but back in the day, especially outdoor plants, we would do this with, if possible, because you'd be like, oh, this is something special, but outdoors, where am I going to do all this? And if you were still within, like if it was before the flowering was, if the plants were still subtle enough, supple enough, you could make a few cuts right in there in the field, and then come back out, cut those branches off, take those with you, and then the plant would continue flowering. So there's ways to kind of get around, because the problem is when you re-veg a plant, it takes a long time. It might take up to a month or longer even to get the plant to throw out
You
enough.
re-veg in 24 hours.
Yeah, throw it back under light and re-veg it. It can work. It can also not work. It can just fizzle out on you.
Yeah.
And so the other problem too is that when you take that cutting from that plant, your best bet is to actually grow that cutting enough to take a cutting off of that and then use that plant. Because what happens is when a plant goes into flower and then gets turned back out of flower again, it's never going to yield the same amount. Like that plant, that cutting that you took from there, it's kind of like it already flowered. It thinks it's already flowered. So
It's kind of like breaking your arm.
you need to regrow that one and then take a cutting from that, and by that time, it's like the plant forgot that it was a re-veg, you know what I mean?
Right.
And so what happens is a lot of times, like, if you take a plant, harvest most of it, leave a few branches on, and back in the day when I was first growing, I was like, I'm just gonna take those, re-veg those, why do I make cuttings, you know what I mean? But then I realized at the end, it was like it made a lot smaller buds. They definitely seemed like they lingered a little longer.
Lost something.
Yeah, there wasn't quite the power that there was in that first round. And by the time you re-vegged them, because it took like a month, you
Right.
could have made cuts 4 times over now. You know what I
Right,
mean?
right.
So you're not saving yourself too much time when you re-veg, but sometimes you have to. It's the only thing you can do. You're like, I think the first plant I ever grew in Amsterdam when I went there was called Florimore. It was from Sensi Seeds, and it was a 4-way sativa, and it was like, I basically just was under the assumption that, this is a good round, whatever. It was literally the last pack from this. They had just transferred this company. They bought out Neville, and they had taken all his stuff into stock. So when I had that pack of seeds, I didn't realize it was the last one. And then, I harvested it, not thinking anything of it, and it was probably one of the most unique plants because it was a polyploid plant. It had buds growing on the middle of the leaves, and all sorts of weird things were happening. Color was unique. It had kind of a gray-brown color to it. It was strange. Grew like a pineapple, really small. Big bud, but it was sativa, so it smoked it. I was like, oh my God, it tastes like a haze. And then I looked at the stump and I was like, and then I went to work and I told them, hey, I need some more of those seeds. And they're like, those are the last ones. And I was like, crushed, man. It's kind of, you'll probably do that. You'll probably cut something down one day and then figure out, like, damn, I think I had the one. Why did I? So re-vegging it, sometimes if there's one little stump, and that's what happened to me with bubblegum. Somebody actually broke into my place, stole all my plants, tried to, killed all my moms. And I was like, oh my God, but I found one, with a still tiny little bud at the bottom, so I re-vegged that, and I got my strain, kept my strain alive. But in general, not the best way to do it if you can. Sets precedent, I guess.
You upset somebody pretty bad for them to come in and not just steal your
Yeah.
stuff, but to kill your mothers
Yeah,
too.
it was some sabotage.
Competitors,
It was
maybe.
definitely sabotage, for sure. Now, probably what everybody also loves to talk about, because especially if they're not growing, is tissue culture. Because of course it's like LEDs, tissue culture. These are certain things that people and feminized seeds, and those are like all the shortcuts. Is what everyone's looking for. You know what I mean? And that's about as far as I've ever seen it get to, where you start to see the leaves are cannabis. But to get it from that stage to an actual plant, I want someone to show it to me because I haven't seen it yet. I've heard people talking. I know that the largest tissue culture lab here in Colorado got their hemp license last year to work with hemp, so I'm assuming that they're gonna create some program that's gonna work, because as easy as cannabis is to replicate with cloning, it's super hard with tissue culture. Like pine trees and certain other plants, boom, they respond like that all day long, you know. Most of the plants that you buy, for instance, at Home Depot come from India. You know, they're not from here. They tissue culture them in India. They ship them over in these little plates like this. Somebody here then grows them, propagates them up to a normal plant, and sells them at the shop. It's cheaper for them to do them from India and have them sent over than it is for us to do it here, because they've dialed their tissue culture program in, and it's in India, of course, so that, you know, that knocks the price down. Here, by the other stretch, you know, we can do it. We have the facilities to do it. It's just we pay our people way too good. And at the end of the day, there's no competition. And Home Depot and Lowe's and those guys, they just want to pay, you know, pennies on the dollar for something that they can sell. So there's that competition. So for tissue culture, I think it's awesome that people are pushing for it. I wouldn't trust it yet. But once it is perfected, which should be also in the next few years, it will definitely be the way to categorize the most amount of strains in the smallest amount of area for the longest amount of time, which is cool and useful, but unless you can take that from that stage and then really make it pop quickly, I'll stick with what I'm proven techniques right now. You know, that's the main thing that cloning is really good for. In general, cloning is for preservation of genetics that in a certain stage that you are, 100% know what the final product's going to be. But to grow with only is kind of like the reason why we don't have enough good strains out there right now, is because too many people are focusing on too little amount of strains. You know, green, OGs, sour diesels, and granddaddies, and the kind of classics. This is just kind of a simple, basics. Water being the number one thing that a plant needs. One of the things I would tell people is try to stay away from RO water right off the bat. People tend to go straight away and want to use reverse osmosis water. It's again, if you're growing in hydro, kind of makes sense because you can add more food to the water because you're not locked out because your water is already has a certain amount of minerals in it. But from a water preservation, right? Like right now, we're about to go into some serious water issues everywhere. It doesn't matter. California's already, deep in it right now. Colorado's always kind of battling water. I mean, water is a huge issue here. And to me, the biggest waste in the industry is using reverse osmosis water for growing cannabis, because you need to use, right now, the average pound of cannabis is using about 300 times the amount of water as a pound of aluminum to make a pound of aluminum. So that's like, when you start thinking of smelting plants and aluminum, there's got to be using tons of water for that, but in general, it's nothing compared to the cannabis industry, because we are basically wasting all the power grid, we're wasting the water, we're wasting a lot of water, and that's, to me, if you're going to take, to make RO water, it takes, for every 10 gallons of water you bring in, you'll end up with, say, 5 gallons of RO water, sometimes less, sometimes it depends how efficient your system is. You might only end up with 3. The rest all goes down the drain, and it's gone down the drain, but it's also, you've sucked out the good, and you've kind of left a really high EC concentrated kind of product to go down the drain, which, Colorado has huge algae blooms now. They have a lot of problems with runoff from the greenhouses, the grows. A lot of grows are doing drain to waste because they don't want to deal with recirculating systems, which, again, huge problems for Colorado down the road unless they sort of step the game up with more wind power, and it's kind of where I'm hoping that people are going to focus their energies. But in general, water, a tall boy for cleaning, which basically is a 2-stage filter, usually more than enough, because people tend to think that if they're going to have super clean water, it's going to be perfect, but a lot of times now you need to restructure that water, and you'll end up having to put either a quarter of the water back into it to kind of balance it out. And also, the plants become just become weak in general. They're not able to take on like they could if you leave the minerals in there. This chart is kind of over extreme because it's really explaining the basics of how it works, but it's mostly osmotic pressure on the roots, and when you have the right pressure on the roots, it's easy to see in the leaves. The leaves stand up, look really happy. They start to dry out, they'll drop down, and you indicate. I mean, basically the idea is whenever you're in that room for that 1 hour a day, you'll get into a rhythm after a while, so you'll know, okay, when I come in, I know I need to feed them. But maybe, at a certain point you come in the room and they don't. Well, that's because they're going to go through different phases. You'll notice in the beginning, you need, like in the veg site, a lot of times people have this misconception that you want to withhold water from the cannabis all the time. You got to keep the water off. That's going to make them more resinous. That's literally like the last 2 weeks max. And that's maybe the last 10 days. Any other time, and you're gonna affect your final yield. And people, it's like there's only between 45 an average of about 75 days in a plant's life. Sometimes more. 16 weeks can happen. But in general, it's very similar to a human. If you think about an average lifespan of 45 to 75 years, about average. Now, if every single day of your life is registered by a day in a plant's life, then you can imagine withholding water for a couple years of your life is definitely going to not help you out, you know what I mean? So if you consider every day to be a year now, the most important ones being the first 21, yeah? So again, very similar to people. Like probably after 21, you're pretty well set in your ways and you've set your path, you know what I mean? And the plant's the same way. If you miss a day in those first 14 days, you probably affected the final yield by a percentage point, or two. And really the best way to look at it is you start off at 100% and you work your way down, because just like a baby's born, it's like it has all the potential in the world to be, if it's a healthy baby to start with, all the potential to be 100%. Now, neglecting that kid by X amount of days, or not feeding it properly, or giving it crappy food, similar thing, it's going to affect it long term. And then with plants, it's really noticeable because we're talking days, not years. So the patterns develop quicker. So in general, like watering, I think people have to understand that, it's all about having the right pH and the right amount of pressure at the root level. And on soil, it's a lot easier because there's buffers within there. The soil can sit in there as long as you're not drowning them. They should be able to work their way around it. Hydro, like people don't know how many times a day to water it. If it's the right medium, it should be able to be watered. Like for instance, on rockwool, you should be able to water it 3 or 4 times a day, no problem, as long as the drainage is set right. If your drainage is not right and you're doing the same thing, you're going to suffocate the plant. So it's just key is good drainage all the way around. It's easier on, like for instance, rockwool. They have perfect drainage of about 20%, 20 to 80, or 80% to 20% water to air, and they'll do that automatically as long as you have like a 1 to 3% tilt on the thing. It will just drain off naturally. Now, if you take it like and lay it on a flat surface, there's no drainage. Absolutely the opposite. It will just suffocate. Just like if you lay a sponge on the counter and it's going to stay wet forever, but if 1 inch gets curled up on it, it drains out real fast. But water quality is important. And a good thing to do too is if you move into any new house or you're going to grow in a new place, just before you start anything, get a water report so that you'll know what's in your water, because they'll do that for free everywhere as long as it's on the grid. They're supplying you with the water. You'll get a report and you can see kind of what you're dealing with to begin with. Like down by my mom's place, which is down near Castle Rock area, she's got artesian well water that comes out at like 20 parts per million, so it's something ridiculous. It's like, wow, there's no reason to even think about cleaning this stuff up. My place up in Golden, about 220 parts, and it could be and it could be different by different pumping stations, different times of year. So it's a good idea to get like at least once a year, get a report, make sure everything's kind of in check. And the other really terrible part about what's going on now in Colorado is that they're putting anti-blooming agents into the water. So you need to know that if that's in there, Because if you have anti-blooming agents in your water and you're trying to flower plants, well, then you can understand where your yields may go down, you know what I mean? Because especially, you know, they're not always gonna tell you either. A lot of times you have to ask them specifically like what's, you know, because they're kind of like thinking it's no big deal. But that's a huge deal if you're trying to grow cannabis and you're like, so I have anti-blooming agents in my water. Okay, that's not a good thing.
Should we take a halftime break?
Yeah, I was gonna do that. So 5.
As it's.
Five
good for you.
minutes.
Sure.
We'll do this one and then we'll do the half hour because that's perfect. Okay, so lights. This is a showing you the full spectrum. And the thing is that what you'll notice in a lot of these, let's say now photosynthesis one, which is the green one. One bulb which we didn't talk about is the plasma bulb, and that's actually the closest that there is to natural sunlight. And a plasma bulb literally runs like almost like this. It runs perfect, you know. It doesn't have doesn't have these spikes like you'll notice in the high pressure. I mean, it's spiking, but it's not necessarily, you know, following this line at all. It's kind of like spiking in certain spots. You get one here, and you get an extreme one here, and another extreme one here. But as far as photosynthesis goes, it's not really hitting the mark every time. That's where, I mean, in general, HID lights are pretty inefficient. That's why we're just blasting them with all this stuff and sucking out as much heat as we can and shooting for the best. Now, they do create good yields. That's why overall people tend to, you know, shoot for 1,000 watts if they can. But if you take the consistency, like if you're going to grow in a smaller area, a 600 watt bulb is way more efficient than a 1,000 watt bulb, grams per watt. So in general, bigger's not always better, that's for sure. If you have high ceilings and good HVAC, then I say go 1,000 watt, but go double-ended 1,000 watt, you know. My last suggestion would be air-cooled, just because of the fact, again, like I said earlier, the cleaning and all of that. Now LEDs, they have a pretty good, you see how it follows the photosynthesis spectrum pretty well. It's just a little bit blockier. And so what you'll notice is it's harder, with an LED light, it's harder to get an exact footprint on the ground. With a plasma, it's like looking at a projector, like how crisp the line is right here. Like this line does not deviate hardly at all to your eye. Like you see how it lines up. That's how plasma blunt runs. Like it's crisp. Now HID lights, they're kind of muddy. So there's going to be a focal point, and then there's going to be a kind of an outside like edge. Those edges need to be overlapped to create a more consistent layer. So the center part kind of equals the two outer fringes overlapping, you know what I mean? So we're pretty used to working with high pressure sodiums, but they're still very inefficient, like when you look at them overall. And then the LEDs, they produce very blocky light so that they're crisp, yet they don't, there isn't overlap. It doesn't work the same way.
So would you be better off with 3 600 lights instead of 2 1,000?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, for sure. Power-wise, definitely. Spread better, because you can spread it out better.
And it's smaller.
And then the heat
sucking
exchange is gonna be less. So, you
In
know,
a small area though, you mean, like small.
I would, no, the same area you could do the same area. Like a 4x8 table, which would be your normal 2,000s or 3/60s, you know. That's pretty much your classic footprint that most people work off because it's a table that they're gonna buy off the shelf, you know.
Right.
So in that situation, yeah, because if you get 4 6s over that, it would be coming over the edge too much. I mean, you could do that, then you basically grow right to the edge, and you'd have your plants sticking out as far as you could stick them out, you know, try to get that extra little bit in.
Right.
But yeah, it kind of shows you that the LEDs definitely could, once they get dialed up, they're going to be much more efficient because you're not wasting, because in those high pressures, in those wavelengths, there's also a lot of heat too. There's a lot of heat being thrown by those spikes. Every time, like, it's like, yeah, it gives you a lot, it gives you way too much actually. And during that, with that excess, is a lot of overflow. And then all you do then is use more exhaust fans, more heat, you know, more air conditioning, spend more money really. That's what it comes down to. So from an efficiency point of view, this kind of just shows you how the efficiency. This is only LED and high pressure sodium. Yeah, I wish I had the plasma on there because the plasma literally, it's amazing how close it hits it. It just nails it all the way down the line. And the first time I saw them, there was one sitting upside down on the ground and it was shooting up at a trade show. And there was like a window here and there was a beam of light shooting down from the window. And if you stood back, because of the dust or whatever that was, just that kind of like the ambience of the room. Like, they look exactly the same. It looks like the light coming in is going out, even though this one's being produced by a light and this one's coming in from the sun. It was to the eye almost exact, you know. And it was like a midday sun or something. So I wish they were a little cheaper because I definitely push them
That's
harder.
my next question, what's the price?
Yeah, that's
They're still out of the range of most people. They're down to around $1,500 for an area of about 4 foot square. So it's you know,
Wow.
they're not cheap. That's
Closest to the sun as you can get though, huh?
yeah, and they do have a super long lasting.
Which one is this?
How many
The
cycles
plasma
do you
one.
get out of them?
Well, they do 50,000 hours, so it's
Okay.
like about 2.5 times more efficient than an LED at this point. So,
Right.
so cost effective wise, once it gets rolling, and it's a point. I mean, it's so small, it's amazing. Like you're just like, and what's really cool, you put on the goggles, you put on like welding, you put a welding mask on and look at it. It's literally about this big, and it's like a little rotating sun. You can actually see it. It's like rotating a little plasma ball. You know, it's
crazy.
wow, dude, that's
Wow.
the universe.
The new Memphis.
Let's take a little tender break or so, and then get some drink. And I'll keep battling. I'll battle on.
Original,
Oh, man, mostly. There is no rules.
I looked at that one.
But it,
Yeah.
I mean, it's such a government.
I was just there for school for
When you're,
that was on the bar.
I was there in '83, so I was around. I argued down the road
You
from your.
know Gypsy Nirvana?
Oh yeah, I know Gypsy.
See, that's why.
Tipsy Nirvana, we call it. We love champagne so much. Stuff to drive is like Bentley or whatever he has. Jag with his bottle of champagne. And I'm just, sure you're not tipsy Nirvana. He's in trouble. Now you heard about that.
No, I haven't
Oh,
heard.
man, he moved to Philippines, became a shrimp farmer, and was still doing all the mail order stuff, and then got intercepted because he had his old girl. Dutch girl? Okay, so she went off with another dude who was working for him, I forget his name. And they like took all his books, took all his customers,
Oh.
and then they called, I think they called in and said, this, this illegal thing, and then they set him up, and they like,
Put stuff down.
put the money through, and then like cops waiting for him, because he would always get cashed in down and stuff. So then they were waiting for him, intercepted him, and they had him being held in the Philippines last night. It was held in the Philippines. And it was like, don't want to be in the Philippines,
No.
related stuff, and so like, oh, you can't teach.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he had, but you know, the thing is with him is he's really,
There's a French
he's a
fry,
fun
smoking
guy,
a
and all that, but
McDonald's
he's
French
also
fry.
like kind of like,
I see that before, man.
Yeah.
There's a couple different ones like that online
so
now.
at the end of the day, it's kind
There
of
was
like,
this
well,
one, I think,
yeah, like, I mean, like,
The dude had made like a chicken
never
burrito
did
and lit the end of it on fire and was holding it up like a giant slime. Pretty funny, man.
No, dude, I've seen companies that do it.
Yeah, but it's not good though. You can literally smoke French fries. Like it could be
So I imagine
McDonald's, like it's bad.
1,000 times.
There'll be some bad shit in there, but you actually smoke it and it lights up, you know?
Right.
That's my whole deal.
I met him on Overdrive.
Can't be dead, yeah.
The chapter, and he used to send me like Cinderella '99,
Oh, yeah.
Blockhead, and I was throwing all that back.
Nice. Yeah, no, I mean, they had some reason. They had a shop actually on,
I got a question, buddy.
it was on a single.
I got an email a second ago that asked me to do a
Now it's way
contact
on
form
the
enrollment,
part of
Yeah.
them,
but it was for
and then they have, like,
bartender
emails
service.
like this.
Oh,
He was
I'll
on
send you the
the
right
email,
Oh, okay.
my shop's
I must
on
have
top,
sent
my shop's on the bottom, the
I was like,
gray
wait a
area.
minute.
I must have helped them start the gray area, so I kind of do the whole neighborhood.
All recent.
And
From
then-
Form Stack?
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, this one's for the bud tender one.
Well, let me get it.
The guy who did the Rockstar Seeds, who used to work for him. Remember that screen, Rockstar?
Yeah, kind of, that was in Overdrive. I seen
Yeah,
it.
I'm trying to remember the guy's name. Jim Spector, he had the guy who used to work for him, he was a really cool dude. It was just funny because it was like they, you know, they had a moment in time where they were definitely crushing it.
Yeah,
Yeah, they were doing really good.
Oh, yeah.
But then it kind of like, I mean, like you expect, a bunch of people jumped in. Now attitude and stuff are way more like.
Yeah.
Thing is, when they deal with attitude, like when I sell them seeds in Europe, that guy is like Johnny on the spot. Like any seeds, if they're like, all right, cool. And before I've turned around to like get the packaging out, he's there with like, all right, everybody. I was like,
That's good.
whoa,
Yeah, you like
slow
that?
down, yeah. But that's why he's so good at what he does, because he gets your stuff.
And they make sure you get it too.
Yeah.
You know, if you don't, then give it right back to you.
Yeah. We'll grab a drink.
Yes.
Yeah, that's cool as hell you're safe, because man, that's been my favorite for 10 years. Ever since.
Yeah, it's, how's it going so far?
Good, man. Very interesting. Glad to get moved up here soon.
Yeah, he's a wealth of information.
Yeah.
Sometimes you gotta get him to like,
Yep.
back up, we're still starting, but
Yeah.
it's really cool here.
I know.
mean,
Yeah, I'm glad. I'm gonna enroll for 102 and come in for that one too, because I'll be living here by then. We came down to spend a week here Sunday, and to meet realtors and find our house and stuff. And so that's what we're doing to get it started up.
There's a
So-
lot of out-of-staters in this course, actually more than Colorado.
Yeah, that's what I figured. Yep. Yeah, it seems
I mean,
like
that's good
Coloradans
for-
right now are just so comfortable within the industry that
That's
they're
good
not
for
really
them, that's
trying. And you know, that's just like people when they came from out of other countries to build our country. You know, and it's kind of the same thing. Is that they were more willing to bust their asses because they had more to lose. They didn't have a home yet, like
Yep, they
me.
did
So
that.
I got to come here and build
Gotta
it.
come.
And
Yeah,
I'll-
man,
I'll sleep 4 hours a night to make sure it goes the way it should. So.
right.
That's another thing. And I did have a question. Are you a Colorado resident?
I am.
Okay, so you know quite a bit about this stuff anyway.
Yeah.
Since you've been
I've
sent through
been
these
working
courses,
with
at least.
this university for 6 months or so. So.
Oh, okay. And now the plant count per house, or is it per house or per adult?
So you can have 12 max. It's 6
6 in veg.
6 per person.
Oh,
yeah.
okay, so
Yeah,
it's
6
12 max.
12 max. So
But
if you
for
and your
two
you and your
people,
wife
me and
or
my
something
wife.
live together, yeah.
But if I had like me and my wife and my mother living in the
can't
same
go,
house,
it won't go up to 18.
No. okay, so
Stops
it's
at
12. It's 12 and 6 in veg, 6 in flower.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
And that's what I've been growing my 6, 3 or 4 years now. I've been a medical patient, so.
Okay. Yeah, when I get up here, it'll be easy for me to obtain that, and you can even grow as recreational. Like you don't even have to have
Oh,
a
no.
med stipulation,
No, yeah.
but it's the
Anybody.
same plant count, isn't it? I'm pretty
Not
sure.
exactly,
Is it
because
three-
you
is it
can
half
ask
of
your
it?
doctor for an elevated one.
Oh, okay.
So if you go to the doctor and say, you know, I don't necessarily like smoking, what they usually do is recommend more plants if you enjoy edibles more.
Yeah.
Like if you say, you know, I mostly ingest.
Yep.
You know, I'm looking for a higher plant count, so I can
Yeah,
get-
and
so
then
I
to
can make
reduce
my
it down to
burgers
like
and
wax and shatters and oils and stuff. too.
or tell them it's for edibles.
Oh, okay.
Tell them it's for edibles.
Edibles. Okay, thank you. That helps.
Um,
Yeah, I'm gonna try to get a support badge as soon as I get up here, but I know that takes some time. I've done some research on the MMED and know and it's not an easy process, especially if you want to try to get a key badge. I've heard the key badge
Right.
will really get you. So,
Right.
but I don't have any felonies. You know, I don't have any drug
I
convictions.
mean, if you got nothing to hide, it don't
so
really matter.
yeah,
does it?
no. I mean,
You
the
know,
only
just
thing
gotta
I
get
might
that
need to,
residency in line. And,
yeah, and it's I think like 90 days residency, isn't it?
oh, it's not bad.
It's not. Bad.
I don't know.
I think
I'm
it's
not
60
sure
or
about the
90 by
residency.
state law.
Yeah.
Pretty sure. That's what I'm hoping, anyways.
So you recording this thing?
Oh yeah,
That's great.
yeah, definitely, man.
At first I thought you were like streaming it live or something.
Oh no. No, I wouldn't do that to him, man. That'd be kind of robbery, I think. I wouldn't want to do that.
Well, if they agree to it.
Yeah, that's true. No, I'm just recording it for my own purpose so that I can come back over it, as I feel like I'm missing things. And
Yeah.
Now with him being over here, do you get the audio? Like you'll capture the audio?
oh yeah, it'll pick up his voice and everything. Yeah, it's a good program on there, man. But also my wife, she kind of wanted to see what I was doing the whole 4 hours, so
Absolutely.
I recorded it for her too. So she dropped me off, and she knows I was coming to class. She's going to do the bud tender class.
Oh,
We'll be moved up here by hopefully from the first day of September,
hmm.
and that's why we're spending a week here now is to find a place. So
Yeah, good luck. It's a hot market these days.
luckily we found one, but it's in Woodland Park.